blinking light in the corner, and we are recording also.
All right, hang on one second. Let me pull up the agenda. For some reason, this is taking a very long time. Okay, there it is. Okay. We're convening the special board meeting of the Washington Unified School District Board of Trustees, April 15th, 2021 at 5:34 p.m. First, let's take roll call. And we'll start with Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Present.
Clerk Venegas.
Present.
Trustee Barnes.
Present.
Vice President Wong.
Present.
And I too am present. And move on to announcement of items to be discussed in closed session. Government Code Section 54957-6. Conference with Labor Negotiators, WSTA, CSEA Management. E2, Government Code Section 54957, Public Employee Discipline, Dismissal, Release. Are there any public comments on items in closed session?
We have received none, President Pizzotti.
All right. Seeing and hearing none, let's take us into closed session. So be sure to log out, everyone.
and watch. Yeah,
Screen
it's kind of,
it that way.
okay, so.
Interesting. I'm just going to leave it there.
I really will not probably get a call. There's Al.
Okay.
Oops.
All right, we ready?
I should get water. Well,
Okay.
wait.
Let's do a roll call. Trustee Kirby Gonzalez,
Present?
Vice President Wong,
Present.
Clerk Venegas,
Present.
Trustee Barnes, and I too am present. Discussion of items
Present.
discussed in closed session. E1, Government Code Section 54957-6 or .6, conference with labor negotiators, WSTA, CSEA, information received. E2, Government Code Section 54957, public employee discipline, dismissal, release, information received. Let's see, moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have any items to be pulled off the agenda? Hearing, seeing none, good. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I move.
Is there a second?
I
Second.
second.
Moved by Clerk Venegas, second by Trustee Barnes. Roll call vote. Vice President Wong,
Aye.
Clerk Venegas,
Trustee Barnes,
Aye.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez,
Aye.
and I too vote aye. All right. Let's see. Hi, public comments. Are there any public comments?
Yes, we do have one request for a public comment tonight, President Pizzotti. It is from Danny Langford.
Hang on
Danny,
a
you're-
second. Let me read the
Sure.
admission.
No problem.
Okay. At this time, I'd like to review some of the legal and policy protocols around public comment during a special board meeting. The Washington Unified Board bylaws and the Brown Act allow for public comment during a special board meeting on only items to be addressed in the agenda. This practice differs from the regular board meeting, during which members of the public may bring before the board matters within the jurisdiction of the board, but not listed on the agenda. As such, during this evening's meeting, all public comments must be related to the agendized items set forth in section J, K, and L of tonight's agenda. If you make a comment under I, public comments, on one of the items in J, K, and L, you will not be eligible to comment on the same item when the board reaches that item on the agenda. In addition, the district prides itself on being a community of diverse backgrounds and viewpoints. Although the board cannot prohibit criticism of the district staff or the community, we ask that comments this evening remain respectful. Thank you. Okay.
All right. Our request for public comment is from Danny Langford. Danny, your microphone is on and you may begin.
I find it really interesting that all of a sudden you've changed public comments on your special meeting when you've agendized it as a regular public comment. I realize this is a special meeting and you can't prevent comments being made on each one of your agendized items. That is not in the Brown Act. I realize you had your workshop. I listened to the entire day. And even though it was hard to hear parts of it, I know that, Kobe, you want to shut down the public comments to 20 minutes per issue, as I know is in the board policy, but you've only done it when you wanted to prevent people from speaking, such as when there was an issue in the Twin Rivers board president with one of our board members. That's the only time you've enacted it in the last, 5 years. There's so many things I want to talk about with this workshop that is so ridiculous. I do appreciate the fact that Jackie said that she didn't want to limit the comments to the public. And that just shows me that, Kobe, you don't want to hear from parents or community members. That's exactly what that shows the community right there. What you said and what was allowed to be said by that community member, and the fact that you're on your phone right now is really irritating. That is not okay, Kobe. What was allowed to say by that community member that parents that want to open the schools full time have structural white supremacy is crap. I know you all know the rest of it since it hit the national news. Unacceptable. If that was me or somebody else you didn't like, you would have shut us down immediately. That was unacceptable that he was allowed to say those things. I'm appalled at some of the things that you even said during your workshop. I know it's supposed to be a kumbaya workshop to get the board to all work as one, but you are 5 individuals that were voted for 5 different individuals, not 5 people to vote one way. I'm so irritated with your comments from the start of this meeting tonight. I just can't even see straight right now. It's unreal to me. You are showing your true colors to this community.
Danny,
And
do you
when
have
you-
any items to comment on?
Oh, I'm going to
J
comment during the meeting.
or
Yeah, I'm going to
K?
comment on items during the meeting. But I need to hear some of what is going to be said first before I make comments on them. So I'll put in my request for those comments. This is public comment. Public.
I just, as I stated before, if you make a comment during public comment, you are not eligible to be taken up on J, K, or L. Thank you.
So Measure Z, again, at that meeting, it proves that you want to spend that money before you even have a plan. You even have it on the agenda to approve spending it before you have a plan. Since you're not going to let me speak during that, I'm going to speak to it now. Measure Z money, how do you have, yes, you had a great roadmap with the master facilities plan, but guess what? There was a detour when COVID hit. That detour, the whole thing, we have no idea what our enrollment's going to be next year. We are in declining enrollment, worse than we already were. And I think before you approve spending any of that money, you need to allow to have a workshop with the community over that money and how it's going to be spent, not just doing it all of a sudden like that. This is not acceptable for this to be on for action tonight. Thank you.
Is that all, Yorgos, or is there any more?
There were no other requests for public comment at this time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And let's moving on to J, public hearing, J1. The public hearing regarding the Sunshine of West Sacramento Teachers Association, WSTA, to the Washington Unified School District bargaining proposal for the successor contract negotiations for the 2021 through 2024 school year. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Associate Superintendent of Administrative Services.
Good evening, President Pizzotti, trustees, Superintendent Hildreth, community, and colleagues. As it's been a very unusual year with the pandemic. Typically, we would have had the Sunshine proposal come sooner. We are receiving the Sunshine proposal of the 2 articles from WSTA, which are the salary and benefits, this evening and coming to you in public hearing, and then later in the meeting under action.
Great, thank you. Is there any comments under public comment here, or under public comment for J1?
No public comments.
No public comment. Any comments from the board? Seeing and hearing none, the public hearing is closed. J2, public hearing regarding the Sunshine of Washington Unified School District 2 WSTA Teachers Association bargaining proposal for successor contract negotiations for the 2021 through 24 school year. Interim Associate
Yes.
Superintendent of Administrative Services, Norma Gonzalez.
Thank you. And in like manner, the district is submitting the sunshine proposal for the same 2 articles, in addition to Article 1, which is in reference to the agreement and the term of the collective bargaining agreement with WSTA. So now both parties are mutually sunshining their proposals for successor contract negotiations.
Great, thank you. And Yorgos, is there any public comment on this item?
No public comments.
Thank you. Comments from the board? Questions? Seeing and hearing none, this public hearing is closed. Okay, information discussion. K1, overview of Measure Z subcommittee meetings held on March 9th, 2021 and March 23rd, 2021. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services.
Thank you. And this being the purpose for the special board meeting this evening is to talk about the overview of Measure Z, the subcommittee meetings, as was mentioned, held on March 9th, 2021 and March 23rd, 23rd rather. And in essence, it's going to be a team presentation. Do have you as part of the subcommittee, as well as Trustee or Clerk Venegas, and also several members that had participated in that. And I believe you were going to take over, and also Angie Nichols and Terry Souza are also here to present and answer questions for you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say also thank you for the subcommittee that showed up and really put some great thought into some of the recommendations that they put forward. It was myself, Clerk Venegas, Holly Buckley, Lisa Menences, Laura Federico, Daniel Gandara, and Natalie Ryland. And let's see, was there any more? It felt like there was more people on the call than that, and I don't want to forget anybody. But Angie, you, as well as Norma, were on, as well as Shannon. And so I wanted to thank you for your efforts and your work, and as well as you, Director Souza. I think it was very interesting. One of the things that I took away from this was just how in unison everybody seemed to be about the major project proposals that are being considered. We all were, how we were all on the same lockstep. We all voted unanimously on these proposals to put forward as some ideas for recommendation, and on at least 3 of the big ticket items we're all pretty symbiotic about. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Angie, for your hard work and putting forward this, or really keeping us together on the presentation to the committee. You did a great job. It was very easy to understand and very comprehensive. And so I wanted to say thank you for that. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Angie.
Thank you. Good evening to Superintendent Hildreth, President Pizzotti, Vice President Wong, and Board of Trustees. Thank you for this time. So as President Pizzotti had kind of laid it through. There were, and also Norma did as well. We had the 2 subcommittee meetings, and the objectives were broken down with each meeting. The first being to really review the facilities master plan and all of the data that went into it. And although the link is posted onto the agenda because it's too large to actually be posted onto Agenda Online, if you were to go to that link, you could also see the appendix that has hundreds and hundreds of pages of data as to how that information was put into the facilities master plan. So there were in-person workshops, there were online surveys, and then there was also an architectural and engineering review of all of the sites. And there's photos of all of the sites in their current condition in those appendix. And then just to make it more succinct and easy to understand, that was put into a plan, hence the facilities master plan. So the first meeting was to really review it, get a good understanding. And as President Pizzotti had mentioned, we had parents, staff, we had CSCA representation and also WSTA representation. And then of course we had our 2 board members as well. So the objective was to discuss the facilities master plan and really get a good understanding of where the greatest needs of our sites are. And then the second meeting is to evaluate what should those project priorities be based off of the data that was collected and then displayed in the facilities master plan. And that with that would be nominations for the Board of Education to consider as potential projects based on the data. So this has been a process that's been going on for several years. And it really did start with collecting that information from site staff, teachers, principals, community members, and so on. So all of that data has been collected for several years and and ongoing thereafter. So with the subcommittee members being the interested parties or those stakeholders that also partook in the data collection, it was only right to invite those stakeholders back to ask them, did we get it right? Did the data really match the needs identified in the facilities master plan? And then based on that, what should be the priorities for the board to consider? And discussion was had, and particularly enjoyed the student participation as well. They had lots of great insight and always add a little pizzazz to any meeting. So we were really glad to have them. And I did invite the subcommittee members today, and I'm not sure, Yorgos, if you're able to view who's on. But I don't know how this would work, but if we have any subcommittee members that have joined us today that might have called in, I don't know if you are somehow able to relay that to Yorgos to have an opportunity to speak if you would like. But of course, or if the board has any questions for the subcommittee members too, I just want to make sure that they're included if they are here.
I see Lisa Meneses is on.
Oh, great.
Line. That's good. Thank you for making it, Lisa.
Right. So this item is really just an opportunity for Clerk Venegas and President Pizzotti to share those discussions and what the overall outcome of those meetings were.
Great. So I think we started at first with the first meeting, basically as kind of a high level overview, going over all the facilities, what those facilities needed, and basically gave an overview of, how much the bond is, and also how many, dollars are needed in today's money to make some of the, fixes that we absolutely had to make. And, did you have your hand up, Angie?
No, my 8-year-old walked in. That was me.
Sorry about that. We all know that all too well. So yeah, it was basically kind of going over for some of us, Vice President Wong and Trustee Kirby Gonzalez and myself have already had the opportunity to look over the master plan and really, delve deep and see some of the, the $250 million worth of fixes that we have in today's money, not out year money, but in today's money of all the fixes that need to be done, system wide or district wide. And in reality, we're not going to be able to get to all of those. Of course, we only have a $150 million bond. And we really kind of considered what was the impetus behind the bond in the first place, and that was equity, and making sure that the campuses had equity. And so when we were looking at the facilities master plan, there is a column on there that says campus equity, and it's a blue column, and the board members that have had the opportunity to help be a part of the facilities master plan got very familiar with all the items that came out on blue when it was originally produced to us. And so it was an opportunity for many of our public to see it, close up and actually work with the document, as well as Clerk Venegas had a chance to really delve into it and really look at all the items that were really highlighted as issues that are needing to be addressed, and some that there was considerable overlap in terms of what is campus equity, what is a 21st century classroom. Those two items do overlap. So especially if you're going to, for example, take down a old dilapidated portable and build a brick and mortar classroom. You're not going to build it with old outdated standards. You're going to build it brand new. So anyway, that was kind of a higher level, or the entry level discussion that we had on the 9th. And then when we got to the 23rd as the date? Yeah, the 23rd meeting, we started looking into, okay, what is it now that we are going to be recommending? And we had a list of major priorities that are big ticket fixes that needed to be done. And then we had kind of immediate strike type fixes, things that we could do that might be a smaller dollar amount, but still equally important. Also hits on the 5 categories of importance in the facilities master plan. And so it's going to be something that we're going to have to consider as we look at these proposals and items. Are we going to have enough money set aside for little projects to go on that we could do immediately, or are they things that we are going to just basically focus on 3 big ticket projects? So anyway, with that, that's my spiel. Is there any more comments you'd like to add, Angie or Norma or Dr. Hildreth? No? Clerk Venegas, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll just keep it simple. Great job, Angie, in collecting that data, and Norma, and as being new on the board, I can say that it was definitely echoed what the community has been looking for. It was exciting and thrilling to see that there was a meeting where we are literally echoing exactly what the community has been asking for as a whole, and there was so much alignment. And it seems like we're all looking in the same direction. So I was very enthusiastic about taking the next steps. Believe everybody listened, everybody very organized from the first meeting to the second meeting, and really from even hearing from Daniel, right? Like he gets to see the insides and he's ground, the boots on the ground, hearing that perspective. Definitely even with that lens of alignment, it was great to be a part of, and I'm excited for the beginning of the manifestation of all the work that you guys have been putting in. So thank you all for your hard work, dedication, and transparency through the entire process.
And I really wanted to say thank you to the kids that participated.
Malaysia and Chloe, they were awesome. Like they had some, really great ideas for things that could be immediate strike, items that wouldn't even necessarily be, bond dollars, things that we might be able to, take care of just as general fund items, which was, good to hear their voice. And it was great to definitely hear the level of interest from Malaysia and Chloe on a performing arts center too. They were very excited about that idea. So anyway, with that, do you want to go into some of the projects, Angie? Oh, that's the next agenda item. Okay.
Not quite yet. That's going to be its own
I
item.
might have skipped
It's
ahead,
not
yeah.
the next item, but the following.
Yeah.
Did we want to check in with any subcommittee members right now,
Yeah.
though?
You know what, Lisa?
Or-
I know Lisa's on the phone. Did you have anything, Lisa, that you wanted to add in?
Hello? Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I just want to say that as a parent, it's been a really neat experience. I remember being part of, Google Form surveys from, I think, 2 school years ago, and then participating in, the parent and community brainstorming session in the Elkhorn cafeteria, and then being part of the Measure Z campaign, and now being on this side of it. Just that passenger who just won't get off this train. But I'm here to make sure that it, continues to go forward, because there's a lot of exciting potential for this measure. So I'm happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you so much for your support and participation. You were great. You had a great voice in our discussion. So thank you very much, Lisa. And there's a phone number on there that I don't know if that's one of our committee members or not. So, okay.
Can I ask a question? How did you guys nominate projects to be recommended to us? I mean, I took a look at the short list, and just can you share with us kind of the thinking of the subcommittee on how you brought these limited lists? I don't. Yeah, just would love to hear more about the discussion.
Is that directed at me?
I think Clerk Venegas, President Pizzat, anybody who was on the subcommittee. So just for the edification of the rest of the board to understand how the ones that are about to be brought before us tonight, what was the process? What was the logic model? How did you assess that? And how did you prioritize it?
Yeah, so I'll leave that to Angie, because what was brought before us was a tally sheet of items that were big ticket items and then quick strike items. And we just looked at those on the, on the basically first draft, or not first draft. And then we looked at those because they were before us. We have, as a board, the ability to put something else before us. We can add things in as a board. This is just things that we all had agreement on. Do you want to add anything, Angie?
So the project priority list and the quick strike project list, those were of either the most common thread of need throughout the facilities master plan. They were the biggest driving projects. And so even though there's only one project listed on that tally sheet, it actually captures multiple kind of corresponding projects aligned with it as well. And the purpose of kind of keeping everything a little bit more simple for them and kind of grouping like projects together, or you know, something that would have the same feature in it together. So it might be something that's unique to the site, or something that could be more widespread. And actually, when we get to the tally sheets later, the items that are in yellow are those that are, I hope I'm not mixing it up because I'm trying to put myself back in March times, but I believe that the yellow are projects that are typically a little bit more widespread and would have an effect or an impact on multiple or all sites or majority of sites, whereas those that are in white are a little bit more site specific. So I tried to simplify the project recommendations for site after site after site that were deemed as the project priorities recommended in the FMP, and also those that were of the most consistent reemergence of items to consider. Excuse me. Sorry. And then also when the purpose of it is to have a visual that's a little bit more simplified for you as the board to review. Obviously, these are just conversation starters and little bullet points to hopefully trigger memories with Clerk Venegas and also with President Pizzotti to trigger memories of what stirred those sort of priorities. But they should be captured. All of the projects should be captured in some way in those two tally sheets. So it's a simplified version of the many, 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 many projects in the facilities master plan. And then also when we're talking about the tally matrices, there was no priority as far as 1, 2, 3. It was just about, you have 8 nominations to cast, put those anywhere. And again, that was about kind of the simplicity of the information for the board to consider. So that way you're not having to tally in numbers, and that everyone's single vote had the same weight to it. And you can it's visually represented in a little bit more easy to interpret. At least that was my objective.
Does that answer your question?
No, I'm literally looking at that. It's extremely simplified compared to the facilities master plan that was developed. And so, I mean, I don't know if there's public comments or just trying to understand the committee's process on their tally marks. And thank you, Angie. I understand the kind of the desire to simplify. I mean, we can have discussion now or the discussion later. If any, we're looking at it later and voting it up. And so, yeah, it's okay. It's, for example, like the water equity as the water bottle filling station. I'm like, when, like that, I don't remember that, right? So I'm like, how did that level, there was other equity things that we were looking at. And so that's one example of like, how did this rise to this sheet is what I'm thinking, right? And I'm looking at Trustee Kirby Gonzalez, like, yeah, it's interesting.
The water bottle filling stations in particular were one of those items that was mentioned site after site after site by staff and by parents. So it was a pretty consistent request, which is why it went into that item. And then the reason why it's under equity is because the way that the engineering and architect firm put it together is he or they qualified it under equity. So I tried to match it as much as possible. There are some items that might have dual. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, for example, like, and again, we'll talk about it again because it's going to come across. Like, I would think new playgrounds. I was at, at campuses, and new playgrounds is also an equity, but didn't get the votes. So a little bit trying to understand water bottles over new playgrounds. Like, I wasn't part of the discussion, so I think it'd be just for my own edification to just understand. And it's not you, Angie. It's just the votes and the tallying, the discussion, right? Why I'm looking at this under equity and the quick strike, and it was like, oh, water bottle filling stations over new playgrounds, but all of our older playgrounds are pretty bad. So, and I heard that from a lot of that from parents too. So just trying to understand the logic and the discussion that happened in subcommittee, if at all.
So the discussions that were had were basically everybody had a tally sheet to go through and assign their initials to things that they felt were important to them in terms of what they thought. Now, we didn't have a discussion as to how things fell into what categories. We worked off of what was before us, and there was a discussion had where we went around the table or virtual table, and we basically discussed the things that if there was an item in which you didn't have basically initials going across, we allowed that person to have a conversation or say why they felt a certain item was in their mind a important thing to be included. So that's how we came about that. We didn't go into the details of the facilities master plan on where the equity line lay and what you're talking about. I think we were more focused on what is before us on these items. Do you have a comment, Trustee Kirby-Gonzalez?
Thank you. I think I am, the order of this is, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, which is maybe what's happening with others as well. And when we go through the plans, then I think that will maybe be more concrete and it will be easier to ask some questions there. I would be interested in, as we go and look at this, is if all of our, say, admin were in a room representing, the classified staff, the teachers, through that lens, how they would rank all this, for you to have had that data to look at as well. Because that is I'm thinking about, which I'm so grateful for everyone that did this, but it's a very small group and we're talking about very big decisions. So that might come up as we go into the decisions of what we are, if we can hear some more voices. And then I think, just to the point of the water bottle, not that I want that to be our whole discussion tonight, but I do know some PTOs were working to purchase their own. And then I think that might be what might be the equity pieces. Some schools were getting them, and it's not fair, obviously, or equitable to have some sites have them because PTOs have funded them. Kind of like the computers. We had some school sites help fund them. So as a district, we worked to support the schools that did not have that need. So I don't know if that's why, but I was in a conversation with those. So it might have been that.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just curious if that's a subcommittee. Yeah, of the
Yeah.
subcommittee. And it was.
Yeah,
I
so there's
agree.
representation there. Yeah, there was representation from certificated and classified, as well as parent groups. Well, yeah, I mean, otherwise the groups would, the subcommittee would be very large, but there were some people that didn't show up, and then about all we could say.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll understand more of the logic and discussion when we get to that item. But within that bucket, you have new playgrounds or window upgrades that nobody voted for, and I just it's kind of these really physical things of okay, and we know that, for example, Elkhorn, those are single pane windows and kids are wearing jackets inside. I just really would love to get some insight to the subcommittee discussions. And I mean, I get the water bottle discussions. I get that. We got grants for that, but then in that same bucket, it was that's interesting. Water bottles over the other things in there, Yes, Clerk, sorry.
Yeah, so let me go to Trustee Barnes here in a second. Like with Elkhorn, for example, they would be taken care of under the Elkhorn modernization on the first page, and same thing with Westfield, because that was it would be caught under a uh, multi-level, you know, facilities upgrade. But yeah, go ahead, Trustee Barnes, and then you.
I was just going to say that before Trustee Kirby Gonzalez spoke, I was thinking I appreciate your questions. I also appreciate, as an Elkhorn parent, the water bottle consideration or the water filling station consideration over playgrounds, because there have been some concerns about the quality of the water fountains at Elkhorn. So maybe that was part of it. Not to lead you, but I am curious about how the process happened as well. Vice President Wong, I think that's a great question. I am also thankful for the water filling stations and the window considerations.
Go ahead, Clerk Venegas.
Again, just so from my understanding, there was specifics like windows would be obviously covered under a whole new site. As an example, like for example, an Alcorn or a Westfield, that those are the big ticket items. And from my understanding, we went from big ticket to smaller items that were quick strikes that we wanted to make sure, and in ensuring, and also the student's voice. I believe that's how it even came up. I know that's what brought my attention was water filling stations for students, as we are moving into wanting to provide opportunity for to be conscious of health and all of that as well. So we were it's like we started with big ticket, and then it was kind of moving towards the smaller ticket items, which of course, if we're thinking between playgrounds and windows, that seem to be kind of in that big ticket as the entire, from my understanding, the entire site being overhauled in a sense, or reconstructed and building new. As we go into it, I think that's what we'll see is a lot of the questions were is instead of voting it in as a small item, is that part of the big ticket? Does that come included in that first part? So from my understanding, at least for being newer to this, was just what is, if we're voting a big ticket, what comes in that big ticket versus what's kind of left out, and what's left. So that's kind of how I understood the process. As we were moving, a lot of it got caught in that first, priority. Because even when we saw the maps of the blue and what was necessary, we saw each site by site and what would impact specific sites versus what would impact district-wide. So again, I think it's interesting that we're talking about the water item as an example, but it is something also that the students were brought up, and just moving in that direction of making sure that we got those big tickets first, and then what was left. That's where we started to kind of see. I think we saw a commonality across the tallies. So that was one of those reasons.
Yeah, that's a great point. So like the
modernization,
Westfield modernization, if you look under campus equity under those two items, basically the whole site is in the blue. If you remember the facilities master plan, the dark blue area was areas that were going to be were in the campus equity portion of the FMP. So virtually the entire school there at both those sites needed modernization and needed to be rebuilt. So that would include windows, and that would include modernizing into 21st century classrooms with technology and wiring, and including brick and mortar classrooms and getting rid of some of the portables. So there's a lot under that generalization of Elkhorn and Westfield modernization, which would also encompass many quick strike items that would be in other categories for other school sites. And I think we have a hand up. So, Yorgos, can you let Mr. Kazis?
Shukis.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
No problem. Hey, just I had a family emergency. I didn't get the beginning of the meeting, so I'm just going to skip to one of the concerns I had. I'm on the CBOC, and I see everybody's working hard to get these projects going and items in there. But the one thing I would have concerned about is the program bond implementation plan, I guess, was discussed earlier today by the outside representative there. I was wondering when CBOC will engage in activities to understand or input into any of these plans or activities coming up. It's just, I'm not familiar with it. Obviously, I'm new to CBOC and that process, but so far, 2 months now or whatever, I have no feedback as to what schedule or anything that's expected of the CBOC. And I think it's, should be addressed somewhere. Who's championing that in the district, or who's the one that is responsible to interface with CBOC?
Thank you. Is there somebody who wants to answer Mr. Shukas's questions? This is not a CBOC committee meeting, or this is the facilities master plan meeting. So just I can let you know generally that the CBOC has really no oversight or input as to what the board decides as the projects they're going to green light for the bond. You have an oversight function in that way to make sure our funds are spent appropriately. Okay.
And President Pizzotti, we will have someone from the district get in touch with the CBOC committee members to give them an update about the schedule and calendar and kind of what to expect.
Any time range for that?
So I will ask staff to work on that and get that information to you within the next week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Is there any more comments or questions from the board? Okay.
Actually, can I ask Angie, is that the confirmation and description of what Clerk Venegas and, for example, the issue of when you say full modernization of Elkhorn and Westfield, does it include everything, including playgrounds? And then the quick is a tally of district-wide issues?
Yeah, the quick strikes, it's detailed a little bit when we get there. They're either the smaller items that might be, for example, if we're talking gutter repair and roof repair, we've been fortunate where Measure V covered a lot of that. But for example, Bridgeway and I believe it's Stonegate, their gutters really need replacement. And that's something that we can do relatively quickly on a smaller budgetary impact. But yes, if we were to modernize, say, Westfield or Elkhorn, of course, we're going to do the roofs and the gutters, and all of that would be included. And that, if you look on the facilities master plan, even though it's all in blue and it's in equity, you can see the detailed list of all of those little mini projects that are captured in that Elkhorn modernization project. The appearance of the site itself is not tied to that map. That's just some options. And when I say that map, I mean for each site. And then we would have a more developed site plans thereafter, but that's what we're looking to capture and include in a modernization project. So if the board were to choose, say, the early childhood education priority or functions within that or something else, but we still wanted to capture water bottles everywhere or roofing at some of these places, then there's a little bit more versatility that you have as the board, where you can kind of mix and match as far as your priorities. And then us as the district and as CPM will present on the next item, we'll put that into a budget to see what we can afford, how we can spend it, and what that timeline looks like based on the priorities identified today by the board.
All right. Is there any other comments, questions? All right. Seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to K2. The Measure Z Bond Implementation Plan and Master Program Process as presented by Capital Program Management. And Norma Gonzalez, the Interim Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services. Wow,
Hi
that's
again.
Zoom.
Yeah, so yeah, I was going to mention we were going to kick it off with the presentation. We do have Mark Rossum and Tim Doan from CPM, which stands for Capital Program Management. And I believe I did see them logged in a moment ago. If you want to go ahead and start that presentation.
Okay, so I want to just make sure that you can all see us and hear us. Are we good?
We got you, Mark and Tim. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having us here this evening, Angie and Terry. We really appreciate the opportunity. So we're here to talk about the implementation plan, excuse me. Clearly, you guys have put a lot of work into your master plan. This has been very well thought out. I see a lot of passion, I see a lot of interest. So this is really music to our ears to see this in the community and everything here. Really, an implementation plan is a roadmap. So think of a roadmap is to take that plan and put it into time. So you have many ways to sort these projects. There's quick strike projects, full-on modernization projects. So our job is to consolidate and take this information. Clearly, you also have to continue to boil it down to get to your defined and approved project list. We understand that. So once we get to that point, this roadmap will help guide this program over the life of its term. So this is really, it may sound quite simple, but it's actually very dynamic because there's many factors and many things that can change along the way. Directions, different expectations and variables. We'll talk about that maybe a little. So really what our first job will be is to kick off and better understand what your expectations are, help understand any scope deviations and changes. So we're looking for input, right? We need to know what your defined lists are going to be. And then really we can get on with our work, and that's to put these into time. That's my job. I'm an operations guy, so I've spent my career managing, building, and working on the design phase for major construction projects, new renovation, and so forth. Tim is actually our CFO and our program budget director. So Tim and I actually put ourselves together to help define this implementation plan, because not only do you have to put them into time, you actually have to budget them in not only today's dollars, but I did hear you guys talk about tomorrow's dollars. So we are, I think with your estimates, we're actually roughly $2020. That's actually pre-COVID, right? So these estimates really need to be looked at. So we call that validations. So validating these budgets is really paramount. We need to know where they are in today's dollars, and then work with our estimators and other input from the industry to figure out and project what the escalations are going to be. So really, it's kind of an overview of what we're going to do to talk to each bullet. So we've been reviewing your master plan. Angie's done really well, and now taking that master plan and flushing out some of these priorities with the Measure Z committee. That's a very dynamic exercise we can see. So again, we need to get the input out of what's going to ultimately be accepted and approved by the board as far as projects go. So again, we're going to be validating these budget estimates. Really important to do. We've got a lot of history with that. And then we start rolling those into an escalation calculation. So picture these projects. If you do a $50 million project in 2024, that's going to cost X dollars. If for some reason the priorities change, and now we put other projects, could be quick strikes, could be any project ahead of that, and we push that $50 million project out just a year, you can see how that changes our escalation calculation. So again, Tim and I, this is what we really enjoy doing together. We also like efficiencies. So where we can see efficiencies would be projects of like type. So when you mention quick strikes, we bundle those together. We look for efficiencies. Sometimes if you're going to do roofing, not only on one project, you may have 6 projects to do roofing on. Well, rather than doing them individually with a modernization project, we've actually taken those on as a bundle, let's say, and do the roofing projects together for efficiency purposes. We've done those recently with fire alarm projects, grouping fire alarm. We've also grouped paving projects together. Another reason to do that efficiency, you don't always have to hire an architect. So for example, if you're going to do a fire alarm project, you can hire an electrical engineer without having to hire an architect and pay the extra fees of the architect and deliver fire alarm projects as a bundle very efficiently. So those are the types of things that we take in. We're kind of an outside third set of eyes, kind of looking at everything that you've done and understanding what you want to do, and maybe looking at it from a different lens and crafting a way to deliver these projects. So again, it's a roadmap. My feeling is you need to start strong and you need to finish strong. So that plan, we talked with Angie a little bit about this. I think you need to be able to take the plan and promise at the end and deliver at the end of the program what we've promised in the beginning. So again, a roadmap will absolutely help get us there. So nothing is left unturned, if you will. So the schedule, this schedule is going to take on a lot of iterations because the priorities could change. So this is going to be kind of a living document, right? A master plan sets all the projects at that point in time. An implementation plan is actually going to take these projects and they're going to modulate through the time of the bond. So we look forward to actually continuing to update the schedule. Important to do. I'm just looking at some of my notes. Of course, schedules include the preliminary planning, the design phase, DSA approval phase, bid award phase, and we get to midpoint of construction. Midpoint of construction is important to us. Generally, that's where you escalate to. You escalate to midpoint of construction. From that point backwards, we call that a reverse phase schedule. You then start working backwards to create all the dates so that you know where to start this project if you want to hit a midpoint of construction. So again, reverse phase scheduling is something that we also do. And then, of course, this is going to ebb and flow a little bit, as I mentioned with your Measure Z subcommittee and things change. So variables, I don't have that necessarily on the list on the next page, but there could be some variables. One might be there's an approved allowance possibly to pay off past debt we saw in the master plan. So that could take some of the dollars out of the overall Measure Z program. We need to know that up front. We also need to know then if there are some supplemental funding pieces. We have AB 841 possibly coming ahead. We have different funding sources, whether it's developer fees, state matching funds. So the more input we can get on any of these variables will help us craft this implementation plan. So again, we can keep all the projects live in time and budgeted correctly. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Tim's going to talk about coupling the schedule and the escalation with developing a master program budget so that we can keep the program, and I do mean the program, on budget.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Yeah, my role in this collaborative effort is to apply the funds to the prioritized projects and keep everything in balance. And when I talk about the various components of the master program budget, most people talk about the project budgets. I also look at other things that we need to build into a master program budget to ensure, as Mark said, we can finish strong. Those other components will be maybe non-project specific types of costs, like program level cost. Consultants like ourselves may fall into that category. There are also reserves that we should put in place. We call them program reserves, to take into consideration maybe any unforeseen things that may arise in the future that could, if they come up, could keep you from finishing projects that you've promised. The other component is cost escalation, as we alluded to. One of the nice notes to share with you is that looking at your master plan, again, they were pre-COVID, very high escalation considerations. Today, we're seeing those escalation numbers much lower than what they were projected back before pre-COVID. And so that's some good news for you. Your dollars are going to go a little bit further than what the master plan may have indicated before. And then we put all those components together with all the various funding sources, and we create this master program budget. I have a sample if you would like to see it, I can bring that up. But that begins the starting point, if you will, and it's based on your selected prioritized projects and an implementation construction schedule that the team prepares. And then that becomes your starting point, and any changes to that, whether there might be added scope or a change of prioritization, it can be quickly modified so you can see the impact to the program as a whole. So that's a very general brief overview of the master program budget, but it's absolutely critical in making sure that the program is delivered on budget and on schedule.
Yeah, we're really happy to see that you have a subcommittee involved with facilities, because you have to have a sounding board, if you will, for bringing plans forward such as this. So when we get to a draft implementation plan, it really needs to be vetted. There's a good time for everyone to weigh in to make sure that we've actually heard your project priorities. We don't want to leave anything out. We've indicated what project budgets, and when Tim talks about a master program budget, that also includes individual project budgets that are fully indexed and loaded with all the appropriate soft costs, escalation, contingencies, construction costs. So we've got a really well-rounded system here, and we have a lot of good history with our citizens oversight reporting. So our master program budget and everything we do really kind of falls out into an auditable, trackable type of effort. But it all begins now with setting the stage, getting these projects loaded up and getting into a master program budget. It's in an executive format. Basically, everything you need to see about the financial health of every project in the program is essentially on one page. It's an executive level master program budget. So that really gets us to a draft plan. And again, it takes a little bit to get this draft plan, as you can imagine, in place with all the common ground that we need to find with what the board's plans are. Ultimately, we get to that draft. So the financial advisor is also something that's really important, because we see your issuance schedule. You've got 3 tranches essentially you would like to do. We've got to overlay this implementation plan with that schedule. One thing that I always say is you can't outpace the funding. We can get going with a lot of design. We can get a lot of construction underway, but you cannot outpace your ability to go get your funding in place and on board. So that's one thing that Tim is really good at, working with your financial advisors. And again, you can look at our schedule and the implementation plan and figure out what the cash flow needs are, basically on a monthly, quarterly, yearly basis. Yeah. Is that right, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to chime in a little bit. The reason why CPM is here today is because if we can place ourselves back in January, when we first looked at the bond timeline, and I believe it was January 26th, and within each month, there were goals and objectives for us to meet with the intention that we would be ready to go and hit the ground running when we do receive the funds. And part of that was implementing, well, redundant word, a bond implementation plan, and then also the master program budget. And what we hear from the board today, as I had mentioned, we would be putting it into time and money. And then we would be bringing it back to the board to say, this is what that looks like. And if that's not what you had in mind, then we'll be able to rework it. And so the priorities that are identified by the board, we're going to take those biggest priorities and see how many we can make happen in the time of the bond with the funds that we have in advance. And hopefully there shouldn't be too many changes as we go along with as far as the priorities. That's why we're doing this in advance. But no matter what, we're always going to hopefully stick with the needs identified in the facilities master plan and the input that we receive from the stakeholders. So, and in regards to variables, one of the options, so they had mentioned the 10% option, which that's not, we don't need an absolute commitment today. What I'm hoping to hear from the board are discussions and maybe what way we're leaning towards. A lot of the items and most of the items here today, other than the development of the project priority list, which even that we're going to take and try to see what we can work. And that final list would be brought back to the board later on to see what that actually looks like and what we can do and see if that's something that is still in agreement with the board or if it needs to be updated or modified in any way. So we just kind of need to know where we need to start, where we need to lean. And with those variables, one of the things that we had spoken about earlier is if we were to do that 10% option, we could do this. And if we were not, then we would do this. And we could kind of compare to see what the board would like to do from there. But knowing where we can start and what we can lean into, that's going to be important for us to see what we should do first, when we're able to do it, and what other of those smaller items we're able to fit in between.
Yeah, that's very well. Was there another question?
I didn't have any questions.
No,
I just
okay.
wanted to but I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
I thought I heard something. So very well said, Angie. So again, the roadmap is a continuum. And you place these projects in time, you budget them in a cost-loaded, cash flow-oriented way. And then if there are changes, then you have to have a way to move a project from point A to point B and see what that corresponding change is. So again, depending on your cash flow schedule and when you want to do these projects, we can move these projects in time and make things fit. So again, it's very dynamic, but it's something that Tim and I have figured out how to do using various tools, if you will, so that things are linked. So when we talk about escalation, if we move a project from 2022 to 2024, it automatically recalculates its escalation through every single cost code in that project, brings it back over to the master program budget so that you can see what the resulting effect is by moving projects from, I'll just say, point A to point B in the schedule. Now, the more defined you are when you give us this information, we really need to know this is your settled on project list, whether it's your quick strikes are going, whether it's the two major modernization projects and all the little pieces of scope we understand that are in there. We really need to have it pretty well defined to be able to start, because otherwise, if we start and then all this is still in a state of flux, it's going to be moving a lot. And so we really need it pretty well defined to start. So you guys are getting there. It's really good what you're doing. Yeah.
But understanding that there will be changes.
Oh, there's going to be changes.
Once you see how it all plays out, right? Because it's hard to make some decisions right now. in prioritization and where they may decide on specific projects you want to do, but when they happen, that can change based on the cost of escalation and how you can move things around to make more efficient use of those dollars.
And you've got a couple of large projects, right up front, Elkhorn and Westfield. Those are two very large projects. So it doesn't leave for a lot of room of bringing other things in. So we understand that.
Yeah.
Vice President Wong, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so I'm looking at, I'm sure everybody already looked at this before, our big 400-page document, right? We have two timelines on page 13, and the fiscal timeline on 33. Did we look at that? And again, I'm still trying to, and again, just still trying to reconcile the decisions of modernization or tick list or whatever strike lists are. So I'm trying to, because I lived and breathed this when running Measure Z, right? Like this is because the public always said you didn't have a plan. I'm like, look on page 13 and page 33, right? We have the cost estimates and we had the timeline in which these projects rolled out. So I'm trying to just kind of reconcile. Did we looked at this as you guys, what Tim, you're saying like we need to know what it is, but also we had a laid out plan already.
Right, we understand you have a laid out plan, but I know Angie, you guys have been redefining that in the later months, right? Certainly.
Right. And you're right. Everything is really detailed and there is the plan, but we won't be able to accomplish everything with Measure Z. So now it's about prioritizing all of these items, because as much as we would like to, and we know that the need is there, we're not going to be able to accomplish everything in the facilities master plan. And if we can place ourselves in Measure V times, we also had the CIP, which was a list of all of the needs of the district. And then we had $50 million as to how to apply it. So it's almost too broad of a promise to say that there's, we have the plan in the facilities master plan. This is a plan, but for the $150 million for Measure Z, we need to see what we want to do with that, with the suggestions made in the facilities master plan based on your suggestions.
Right. So it's the reconciling of we as a board, and the three of us were here, is that we said equity, and equity has a price tag. It's a very clearly defined price tag in there. But now we're being asked to do something else, and I'm just trying to reconcile the difference. And maybe it's just because the subcommittee had a different conversation. I'm trying to figure out what I was missing between committee conversations and the plan we already laid out and identified with the board already.
I just want to say, I don't think the subcommittee's conversations had any prioritization with their recommendations. It was, you got eight things that you would like to see. Didn't matter what category they fell in. You had 8 things that you could put your initials next to and you think they're valued. That's all it was. There was no prioritization, whereas the board placed our values in campus equity, right? That was, or at least equity based. And so that was ours. And in our discussions, that's kind of what we valued. Ultimately, we make the final decision. This is just a recommendation from all the stakeholders that were at the committee meeting. It wasn't a prioritization of any one thing. So it was just, these are what people would like to see.
And I'll comment also, Jackie, we definitely heard from the board that equity was loud and clear. I guess that the district just needs clarity as far as what that expectation is. Is it all of the items that are under equity? Because if so, we could make that the priority, or the facilities master plan is also laid out where we could, or the board could pick and choose which items under equity or which items under such and such.
Yeah, and that was what I was trying to get on the last item, is like, is that how the subcommittee was laid out versus looking at page 13 and page 33, right? Like, I just was trying to kind of figure out, like, we were pretty clear on where we were as a board at the time and how that, and again, value the work of the board and the ticking and the 8 strike marks, right? But just trying to reconcile, like, we laid out a plan, was that part of a discussion and then something else happened and we decided to prioritize something else? That's what I was trying to understand.
They have to be looking at.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, and it ultimately, yes, it is the board's decision. I just wanted to kind of understand. There was a lot of work by you and other folks, Angie, on this very detailed plan. And I'm just trying to reconcile, like, okay, we have a cost estimate over 3 years, 2 years of, like, for example, you take the equity bucket and the VAPA bucket, right? And I thought we had said those are the things we wanted to do. And then if we were laid over extra, if there were extra things that we wanted to do, then we would identify that with, I'm just trying to kind of understand what decision we're making right now, or we're just revisiting and reiterating and confirming our priority from before.
Well, if we were to go with equity, that wouldn't absorb all of the funds.
Right.
So we are also curious and want to know how to plan for the other objectives that the board may have and would like to see out of Measure Z, and planning in advance and kind of having that roadmap to move forward with. That's going to allow us to be more efficient, more cost effective.
Yep.
And this planning part is really going to help us save money and time later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like there's 2 items under campus equity and 1 item under VAPA that could eat up almost the entire amount of the bond. So it really, it's how we decide as we want to utilize the funds and prioritize them. Tim, Mark, did you have any more comments?
No, if there's no more questions, I think we're pretty good. You know, one clarification for Jackie. Remember the estimates that were put together at this stage, those are referred to as conceptual estimates. They aren't, you know, from a set of plans, a very detailed cost estimate. So when you have conceptual estimates, some items are going to be on track, some may be a little over, some may be a little under. The key is that the bottom line trues up, right? Some are over, some are under. That's conceptual estimating. It's our job to validate those and take each one of those through a process and continue to refine them so that as you go, they're more accurate. They're more accurate when you give that budget to the architect. So the architect has a realistic to budget, design to budget clause, if you will, so they know what to design to. Then the bid day budget is established. The bid day budget is the target budget, of course, for the contractor to hit on bid day. So it's a refinement process where you guys started, and it's our job to help guide and validate that type of information. And we take it in from a lot of different sources. It's not just what we have here. So does that help maybe just explain a little bit more about what we're going to help you do?
Yeah, you're helping us kind of project the budget for our future projects, but we have to actually identify and agree upon as a majority board the projects for which we identify. Yes. I get that. So it's not really you. Like, I totally understand your presentation. It's just a matter of like, I'm just trying to reconcile a process, a very rigorous detailed process that we went through with like, okay, then I thought we had a plan and this is, an additional process.
Gotcha. Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Tim. Mark. Do you finish?
Yeah, I'm good.
Trustee Kirby-Gonzalez.
Hi, thank you. Okay, I think that these questions, I have your first names, Tim and Mark, so I apologize, not the last, but you mentioned AB 841 funding possibly, and I don't know what that is. Can you just clarify for us what AB 841 funding might be and fund?
That is the likely funding that's coming for HVAC, the clean air initiative that all is, resultant of COVID basically. So it could be something that can be applied to much like the Prop 39 program. So it's still in its regulation development right now. So those regs are currently being worked on, but basically it's indoor air quality, I'll say clean air safety, if you will. So HVAC upgrades, Angie, I'm sure you've heard of it. So it's being worked on as we speak through actually the California Energy Commission. It's actually where it's being hailed from, if you will, from a funding standpoint. You do have to qualify for it. So they will have metrics about how a district and by project qualifies. but it's going to be a fairly large source of funding from what we're hearing out there. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. And being in the queue for that is exciting. And I'm thinking, so I remember when we had the big helicopters bring in HVAC to some of our school sites. So could that, let's say we have some new HVAC thanks to our other bond, could that help, do you think, with windows? Could possibly, if that's indoor air quality, do you think there might be some wiggle room in that?
I don't think so.
We don't know, not yet. Okay.
Windows, probably not. But,
Okay.
But
Well, I feel like air quality. Okay. Well, we have lots of window issues, so it would have been nice. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question with that, and so you brought up the COVID money. I was thinking about our COVID dollars as we talk about some of our outdoor spaces. And if we could utilize some things that we already know that we're looking into doing and having outdoor tables and for eating for kids that could match up with these. Are those conversations that we would have with you? Are those done separately as we look at where COVID dollars might, in some cases, overlap with some of these maybe even, I don't know, drinking fountains, because I mean, not that we want to spend all of our time on that conversation, but because they're touchless or whatnot. So are there places where those conversations may overlap since we're looking at quite a bit of one-time money?
Sure. If those are funding sources outside of Measure Z and outside of the purview of what's to be delivered within Measure Z, you know, the bond list, the project list, then you can always bring in other projects. In fact, one of the things we also like to do is reach out to the M&O department and take a look at their 5-year plan and just see what's in the 5-year plan that you would have been spending money on in the 5-year deferred maintenance plan. And if that is likely, you've already done that. You've kind of folded it into roofs, exterior walls, doors, and so forth. So you're essentially freeing up dollars over on your M&O funding sources with your Measure Z bond. So there's a lot of crossover and opportunities to bring in projects like you're talking. Yes.
And then my last question would be, do folks ever consider, or is this in your purview, or this might be something separate, but looking at hiring a grant writer for a specific task, such as working with a VAPA performing arts piece, if there was a grant that fits in with that? Would there be any consideration of maybe 1 or 2 of these very big projects being able to also fall into any grants that are out there?
If you can identify the grant, we were successful recently with a high school television, is actually a real live TV studio, performing arts, all complete digital upgrade. We ended up writing a grant with the district, petitioned, and actually it came to the district through CTE as a career technical education funding source. We actually backfilled the project funding by demonstrating that after the project was done. So we actually had that opportunity to go back and show that we actually pulled off a project. I mean, a full-on digital TV studio that mapped over to the Performing Arts Center. Then you could take HD cameras to every spot on campus, including the high school stadium, and brought it all together, demonstrated that to CTE, and brought funding back to the district. So grants are tough. Grant writing is tough. So we have participated in that. I can tell you that. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Sure.
And if I could comment on that, Sarah. So if you remember in the facilities master plan, there's also a component for funding options, and it also has a list of our availability, at least with OPSC, so we can see when we're, what we have eligible, or what sites are eligible, and then also what's coming up. So for example, if we wanted to do something at Southport or Bridgeway, we're coming up on their term where they're going to be eligible for some possible portable replacement money or some new construction money, or modernization. So that's where the budget plan would come into play to see when is going to be the best time to pursue these projects, to capitalize on maybe some of those grants as well.
Okay, is there any comments, questions from the board members? Yorgos, do we have any public comment?
We do have one hand raised from Kazis Shukis.
Okay,
Your
go ahead.
microphone is turned on and you may begin.
Thank you. And this question goes to Mark.
Did we lose him? Oh, he muted.
You there now?
There you
Am I
go.
there?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, have you actually reviewed, Mark, the actual Measure Z bond documentation? I've heard a lot about the facilities maintenance plan, and that plan was developed back in 19. And the bond obviously was voted on by the citizens in 20. So your review of the facilities maintenance plan may not actually get total bond. The projects are the same, but the items are different in some cases. Have you had a chance to review that? Mark?
Yes, on a preliminary basis, we have, by all means. I mean, your facility master plan is, it's what, almost 200 pages long. So we have looked at that. Then, of course, Angie's taken things through in the last couple of months and better defined some of your immediate priorities, if you will, at least a consensus, maybe, or a census of priorities. So on a preliminary basis, to answer your question, yes.
Okay.
And to add to that also, the language of the bond and the projects that are developed, they actually mirror the 5 project categories that are in the facilities master plan, and they give examples of what those different projects would look like under those categories. So the bond projects were based off of projects that were identified in the facilities master plan. So it's a partnership between the two of them together. So I appreciate that clarification and that opportunity to clarify because they are kind of going hand in hand.
Great, thank you. Moving on, is there any other questions or comments from the board members? Seeing and hearing none. Thank you, Tim and Mark, for your presentation. We appreciate that and all the information that that you submitted. Thank you so much. It was very helpful, and thank you, Angie, for that great bit of information there.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. In fact, if it's okay, we might stay on. Looks like you have another item just for informational purposes. It might be good for us to listen to, if that's all right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. K3, overview of the Measure Z subcommittee project recommendation list. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services. And I imagine this is the both of you again.
Yeah, that is correct. And thank you. This part is actually where the deeper dive of conversation is with regard to the items, the project priority categories, as Angie mentioned, and of course she'll chime in, as well as Terry Souza if he would like to contribute or add to this discussion. But in essence, those 5 categories are the campus equity, visual and performing arts or VAPA, future ready classrooms, positive campus climate, exterior enhancement, and 5th, early childhood education. And then of course it does break down the 2020 costs estimates for those categories. And if you'd like to have a deeper discussion, we've touched on some of those charts with regard to the subcommittee project priority tally matrix, as well as a quick strike. And this is for your discussion.
Great. Go ahead.
I'll elaborate a little bit more on the project priority and the quick strikes. I was trying to be very succinct in my rationale, so I'm just going to read it because and if there's questions. So the project priority matrix, it represents the projects that are the most prominent, costly, and or commonly voiced by the stakeholders for each category. The quick strike project matrix represents the miscellaneous projects that were also of prominent discussion points amongst the FMP stakeholders that may have less of a budgetary impact or could be delivered in a shorter amount of time. And as we were speaking to earlier, the project priorities that are going to be those big ticket items, like I love that we're on the water bottle trend. If we were to put new water bottles in a modernization, we're going to put in the most updated and current per our standard, which we're really trying to roll out those water bottle filling stations everywhere. So if we were to put in, well, also with the modernization, when we see in the quick strike projects later on, there's ADA compliance upgrades. Of course, when we're going to modernize a site, it will be ADA compliant. However, if we're going to focus on Elkhorn or Westfield, that doesn't address the ADA needs elsewhere throughout the district. So it's an opportunity to not only serve those two sites that are really represented under the equity category, but also give such services to other sites that would have less of that budgetary impact, and we could still do it in a quicker time frame and disperse it elsewhere.
Great, thank you. Did you want to go through some of the projects at all, or are we looking at the starting on the the major project priority tally matrix? Is everybody looking at that, or did we?
Could I share my screen and put one of them up?
Yeah, you could do that. Go ahead.
Okay,
We'll
start with the big ticket items, which we have titled as the project priorities. So as I had mentioned previously, the yellow, or excuse me, I had it mixed up, and I'm glad that I'm looking at this. The yellow might be a little bit more site specific, and the white are going to be those that are very specific to one or a few sites.
Okay, those are quick strikes.
Oh, geez.
You want to start with the
big ticket
items?
Thank you. It should be. Sorry, I'll stop sharing that one, and then I will bring up. Quick strikes. Did I bring the right one up for you?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it's so small on there. So same applies. The white is going to be a little bit more site specific, and then the yellow is a little bit more broad spread. And as we mentioned, the stakeholders that we had in attendance for the subcommittee, those representatives, they don't negate all of the hundreds of people that gave their input during the facilities master plan. Those voices are still a part of these recommendations. And then also whenever the board is ready to put their list into action, you're not limited to these either. This was an opportunity to have those stakeholders take a look at the data, and now that it's been condensed, have an opportunity to communicate it back to the board. However, one important stakeholder that was not on there is going to be the engineers and the architectural firms that did their assessment of the sites where they were going on to the roofs, and they're checking out the mechanical equipment. So that's a little bit more difficult to read, because that may not be a priority for someone who's working inside the classroom and doesn't quite realize maybe the condition of some of our materials. So you're not limited to this. Again, this is just a conversation starter and a little bit more of a fine-tuning way for the stakeholders to voice their considerations. And then this is the larger ticket items. And then if this is just to discussion and review, and then the quick strike, will review after.
So yeah. Angie, I'm just trying to understand the chart. So, and I'm looking at the master plan, right? And for example, Elkhorn modernization would only happen in, for example, certain classrooms, ECE classrooms, the admin, library, NPR, that's where the word modernize is. But in addition to kind of bucketed in the equity category for Elkhorn, there includes water bottles. So I'm again trying to reconcile our earlier conversation that when it was described, it was that modernization would include water bottles, but no, it would not, because I'm again trying to reconcile how this was condensed and looking at the list of, for example, campus equity in our master plan that includes water bottles and playgrounds and other things.
Right.
Yes.
And wouldn't it also be like, future ready classrooms would also fall under modernization as well as positive climate?
That's a different tick, like that for Elkhorn, that's a different tick. That's future ready classrooms is actually item number 3, and there isn't a whole lot in there. Like, again, I think what's helped is the crosswalk with the actual book.
Yeah, so especially with those modernizations, they're going to include everything that's going to be modernized, which would include any sort of IT infrastructure required, because if we're going to modernize the entire site, we would like it to reflect the needs of today. But however, if you were to choose to go the equity route with Elkhorn and Westfield, then there's still an opportunity which would include things like the water bottle filling stations or new roof or ADA pathways. But what we didn't want to do is also just limit the ADA upgrades or the water bottle filling stations just to those sites that are getting modernized. There's an opportunity in a quick strike plan, if the board were to choose, that we could include that for all sites or multiple sites. Did I answer your question, Jackie?
No, I mean, it's probably a more detailed kind of, again, just when you condense things, you lose other things, right? You lose the detail of a 200-page document. And so when you say modernize Elkhorn, I see modernize here being very strategic to specific items in Elkhorn, right? But the water bottles, I'm sorry, I'm not stuck on the water bottles, but like gutters and downspouts and other things are separate from the word modernize in the itemized list of equity for Elkhorn. That's, again, just trying to reconcile our actual list to a condensed list. And again, when you condense, thank you for doing that, but you lose some kind of level of detail for me to kind of reconcile, like okay. Like that's where my disconnect is.
And I believe in our discussion, it was said that like roofs at those two facilities have been recently fixed, so they wouldn't necessarily fall under the modernization portion of some of those of some of the fixes that needed to be done. However, there are many other things that do need to be completely renovated and taken down to the studs, much like the Fallbrook classroom did in some areas, or the Fallbrook campus did in some of the areas. So, excuse me. There's multiple things that are encompassed under the modernization, and like I said, I saw many of the future ready items, many of the positive campus climate items, and even VAPA classrooms being included into the blue areas of the FMP for Elkhorn and Westfield. So,
right. So, but the word modernization is different and specific to everything you just said, right? So just trying to understand when you say modernize Elkhorn, what was actually really meant in the tick list of things that were under campus equity for Elkhorn.
I took it to mean, when I was looking at it, I took it to mean that, we were looking at modernization as taking all of that blue category, and many of those things fell under different categories as well. Because we're remodeling one, we're going to have to do others as they would be coming up as well. Anyway, Angie, did somebody else have any comments or questions? I didn't want to monopolize this conversation, but Angie, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, other than kind of what I explained already. If I could clarify anything, I would be happy to.
Okay.
So
Hey, if I could
Trustee
speak
Kirby?
a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead, Director Souza.
So I think when we talk modernizing, we think of it as a more holistic approach to the site internally. And many of the equity items, and then also, so our current project, for an example, we're doing water bottles, we're doing future ready classrooms, we're doing the campus beautification for the outdoor spaces. So we catch a lot of that when we're doing it. So they cross over between categories. So the modernization at Westfield and Elkhorn would cross over to a lot of the other categories. So the water bottle filling stations by themselves on a quick start project really pertains to other campuses besides those.
Gotcha. Okay. So if we were say, as we have in the past, we want Elkhorn, everything on that tick list, right? The whatever, however many, that we actually focus on equity on, because the word modernization is throwing me off, because it only, on the tick list, there are only like 5 things that are on that tick list that say modernize.
No, yeah.
Right? So no,
That's not what we were intending.
well, I don't, that's the point of clarification that I'm trying to reconcile.
All right, Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
well, that's what I'm looking at it on my phone if anybody from the public is wondering, because it won't come up on my screen. But as I'm looking at it, so under campus equity, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're recommending with this check mark. So Westfield Village, modernize 12 existing permanent early childhood classrooms, modernize 5 existing permanent classrooms, replace and relocate classrooms. So there's that full list is what we're talking about when that's checked off, that all of those would get done under campus equity. Is that what you're saying? Because I think it would help if we all had our big binders out. Because
Yeah.
we are not, I feel like, all speaking the same language. So in terms of everything getting done there. So that is what I'm understanding. And that is the correct thing to understand, correct? That those recommended projects at Westfield Elementary School on page 76 are the things that would be getting done at Westfield Elementary School, we expect, if this goes through.
Right, because they're in blue. So the campus equity portion is captured in blue. And then that is also where those line items for in cost whenever you're looking at campus equity as well. But just to simplify the term is the modernization, because there are so many items on there.
Okay.
And if we, yeah.
Okay, that's good. And I'm very supportive of Elkhorn and Westfield absolutely being right there at the top. The other ones, now I'm trying to understand what else is coming through this that's being recommended when I look at this tally matrix. I'm trying to understand. So from this, what specifically here are you recommending? Elkhorn, Westfield.
So there was 4 things in which everybody was on the major priority, or not major priority, but the major project list. And that was, everybody was unanimous on Elkhorn and Westfield in terms of their modern. Everybody was unanimous on River City High School and Washington Unified School District Performing Arts Center. And then everybody was unanimous under early childhood education, replacing pre-K through 2nd grade portables with permanent buildings. Now, that may not fall under campus equity as priorities, but these were taken out because they would be done in Westfield and Elkhorn, just under the blue sections, that encompasses the modernization, but these could potentially be done elsewhere. And that's what the committee all agreed on as things that they thought were important. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily as a board we have to agree with that, but these are things that the committee said.
Can you explain to me then, when I'm looking at this, the replacing of the portable classrooms for the pre-K 2nd versus just simply replacing portables with permanent? How are you? You're only focusing on pre-K second and your recommendation?
No,
Or-
I believe there are other portables that have real lifespan.
I could be wrong. With, because remember, I think there was the discussion, Chris Benitez said that in a perfect world, we would like to replace all of our portables with brick and mortar buildings, as they have a longer lifespan and are much easier to fix and maintain, whereas a portable, after 20, 25 years, you basically have to just get rid of it, right? Whereas you can fix and maintain a classroom. You can't do that with portable whose floor is falling through. So, Angie, can you?
Yeah, I'll add to that. So in the project priority category with the early childhood education, that was specific to the pre-K through second age groups. And if that was the direction that the board or whomever would like to pursue, then that wouldn't address all of the portables. Because if we were to replace all of the portables with stick-built, that I don't even know if Measure Z could handle that alone. So if we were to do the ECE, and we can make those new permanent buildings designed for an ECE use, not just a classroom. And then the same goes for Future Ready. So Future Ready, that took place from third up. And then that also has the component for replace portables with permanent buildings, because that would just be the classrooms throughout that we could, depending on the site. However, if we were to do an entire site modernization, we're not going to put in any more portables. I think that we're all in agreement that we have no interest in that. So those portables would be gone and they would be replaced with permanent. However, if we were to have one of those or some of those classrooms be in those early childhood education mindset or design, then we would design accordingly. So whether that's in classroom storage built in, or if it were to include a bigger space or smaller space, then it would be designed per whatever the use of the site will be.
My feedback specifically on that, I don't know what other board members think, would be we had talked about before age. And so I think whether it is, we've been in some of our portables that are pretty dilapidated, and whether that is a kindergarten or whether it's a fifth or whether it's an eighth grade, my thought might go more on which ones are aged out. So more on the lifetime of that portable replacing versus simply the grade level, unless we thought that all of our oldest ones were in that grade level. That would be my priority, just for the health and safety, because I know some of them are old versus the timeline.
And that feedback, Sarah, is exactly what the kind of feedback that we're hoping to hear with this. These are discussion points for ideas to come to mind with the board and for us to document as we go. And then that's going to help us create the plan. So let's say the PE classrooms, just because that's the first one that I'm looking at, you know what, no, but you know what, such and such really needs a PE classroom because all their classrooms are so small and they all have low hanging ceilings and they need to have something. Then that's something that we want to hear and see if that's something that we can make it work. It doesn't have to be all PE classrooms. However, I mean, it is equity, so that wouldn't be a good concept. That's not the best example, but that's exactly the type of things that I know we as a district are hoping as far as how to plan in detail.
Okay, I'll ask one more then. Thinking if I'm trying to think of all the PE classrooms I've been in the district, and many of them, I know our physical education teachers are near and dear to all of our hearts. Many of them I'm not seeing as a high priority need to redo. Are there some sites? I mean, I'm thinking of Riverbank, I'm thinking of Bridgeway, I've been in Stonegate, South. I'm trying to think of where there might be a specific need of one that is not like the other, because there's some very big spaces and rooms, and so is there some thought of why that came to the list, or if there's some that stand out as need? But I don't see that as a need across the board over these really critical pieces.
And that's a good question. And I know Terry could speak to this as well, because you're right. All of those sites do have a PE classroom. However, not all of our sites have a PE classroom like that. Most of those came up during the K-8 expansion that we did several years ago. However, not all sites have that space. So in that case, it is an equity issue, which is why it's under that category.
And a good example of that, if I might, Trustee Gonzalez, is Westfield. They don't have a purpose-built PE area, for an example.
Perfect. So something like that, then I would be supportive of, but not supportive of all of them. So I think having the specifics is helpful to say these sites don't have an adequate space for students.
Well, and a site like Westfield, we could add that into the modernization. It's not, but since you're going to be doing a complete modernization of, right? Because I'm looking at the FMP right now, and there's, it's effectively modernizing the entire campus. There's a couple there's two classrooms. There's a PE classroom in orange and a VAPA area in maroon or purple, and those are all under basically the whole revitalization of that campus. As I look at it, maybe I could look at it kind of small.
And if I could comment on what you had said, Sarah, with only the sites that need it. And if you look on the facilities master plan, the sites that need the PE classrooms or are lacking PE classrooms are identified there. So we're not going to just say brand new PE classrooms for everyone, even though you already have one. We're not interested in that. We're only looking to provide equity where there isn't any.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any more discussion from the board on this tally sheet or questions? Clerk Venegas, Trustee Barnes just stepped up. Do you have anything? No, you're good. Okay. Did you want to go to the quick strike list, Angie, and bring that one up?
Okay, so as we mentioned before, these are kind of the miscellaneous catch-all. So my recommendation for the board would be to consider those bigger ticket items first. And so that way we can see what we could fit in between here. And later on, when the board will consider what they would like to pass along for us to put into plan, if we were to have two separate lists of the priorities, and we also hear feedback from the board as we're going along, where those major desires are, and that could be on the quick strike or it could be on the project priority too. And we want to hear what those biggest needs are or wants are, and then we'll try to find a way to make it work. So again, we have the white that's a little bit more site specific. I had mentioned the gutter and roof replacement prior, and there's really about 3 sites, I would say, but I know Terry, he could correct me if I'm wrong, that need, well, actually 4 sites that may need some attention in that way. However, it's not district wide. And then as we're going along with the projects, I also would just like to make a note that there's still going to be board items for all of these projects that will be brought to board later on. This is really, actually, I think Mark with CPM, he mentioned it, like this is a little bit more of like a study session. And I think that that's a little bit better of a term. This is for us to hear how we are to move forward and to hear your input. And then this was a way for the subcommittee to document where they felt your eyes should be.
And this is the quick projects, and as you can see on this tally sheet, this was much more varied. There was no consensus, 100% consensus on any one item. So we all had different opinions on whether or not, a particular item should be included. There was always either maybe one person who had differing opinion on these items. And, if you think about Westfield and Elkhorn and say the Performing Arts Center at the high school, if we did those three things, there's very little money left over. There's certainly a little bit, but not a great deal to do quick strike projects. So this was just kind of a brainstorming session on things that we liked and we thought were of importance. There's, the technology and infrastructure updates. That was one that a lot of us felt were important. The exterior painting is kind of a modernization, but it's also kind of deferred maintenance. That was very close to getting consensus support. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot that we all agreed on. We all had our varying things that we really had our eyes on as, this could be a good thing that could be beneficial. And especially there's more district-wide items here and fewer things that are site-specific. Sorry, I can't speak. So is there any comments, questions? Vice President Wong.
We in our board prioritize VAPA as number 2. Was there a discussion about why neither one of those things were chosen by anybody? Did anybody make a plea?
I think it's because the bigger ticket items might have encompassed some of those.
Just curious about the conversation. So
can you restate your question? Vice President didn't hear the question.
No, in this quick strike project, the prior board, we were very clear equity and VAPA, right? But on this list, literally nobody chose anything in VAPA. On that short list, that was district wide. I just didn't know if there was any discussion about it or a thought about why that may have been.
I guess, yeah. For me personally, Jackie, there was, again, my focus was when it came to equity, it was the 2 campuses that we're talking about, and then VAPA. And it kind of seemed like as we moved, since that was clear, then there was, from what my understanding, it was what else if there was some quick strike items. So I didn't want to double down my quick strike options since I felt personally, again, I'm new to the process, but I felt they made it clear in the modernization that it was our 2 campuses, Elkhorn and Westfield, and then VAPA as the Performing Arts Center at River City. And then as we moved, what other, I felt like I had other options, so I didn't want to put all my, I didn't want to or put 2 votes on the same thing. It seems so. I wanted to kind of.
No, you're good. Okay. I can hear you. You froze, but I can hear you.
Yeah, I didn't want to go ahead and double down in a sense. I wanted to kind of look at and wanted to listen based on the conversation. I was listening to roofs as an example. That was across the district. There was different roofs that needed and gutters that needed some attention. So just as I was listening to the conversation, I was kind of being guided by that as well.
Now you.
Do you feel that, do you want to?
I'm back now, right? Yeah, I'm sorry. So as I stated before, because it seemed to me again that in that first tally, it was our Westfield, our Alcorn, and then VAPA would get taken care of. Some of the other options like the deferred maintenance, I haven't been to every site lately. So just hearing some of that conversation, that's kind of what I started to kind of tally in, since it felt from my position that we had already discussed and we had already agreed in that big ticket item that that's at least that was my, so I don't know if that makes if that
No.
answers-
I mean, no, yeah, and I get for Elkhorn and Westfield that that's part of the equity tick list, but VAPA, like there are other campuses that aren't whole campuses, and so just was there a discussion about like, well, VAPA, we've made a lot of kind of curriculum investments, for example, into VAPA, and we pride ourselves in VAPA, and I just was curious that
and the VAPA from the conversation that I remember specifically too, it was the Performing Arts Center at River City, and then it was VAPA classrooms across the district. So different classrooms is at least that's what I see. That's what I remember in the conversation was they wanted that came along with that almost that encompassing VAPA would be talking about the center at River City as well as classrooms across the district.
Yeah.
And because of all these other, different points that they were making, it wasn't just one center, it was across the district, looking at every classroom and making sure that we had classrooms across the district.
And just exactly what you pointed out, and that's kind of the way my mind worked was with the funds that are going to be expended on what I pictured were the two pressing needs of the modernization of Elkhorn and Westfield, and then the Performing Arts Center as a VAPA big ticket item. I didn't see a whole lot of room for creating or modernizing band or VAPA items at other campuses, even though it's something that I felt was important. And I actually brought up that comment that many of our facilities have, VAPA classrooms that are very close to classrooms, and they may have very little instrument storage areas. They may not have the ability to play those instruments without disrupting other classrooms. So
right.
I did make that comment, but ultimately in the end there was other things that I felt we're going to have very little money to spend left over, and that's kind of where my head was. We're going to have big ticket items eating up the lion's share of these fund dollars, at least from where my head was at. I'm not saying what other board members are thinking, but yeah.
No, I mean, just subcommittee members, right? So, I mean, again, we've invested a lot in music education, all of that. Just it was a very clear, like, oh, nobody ticked off this in this area.
Yeah.
It's very noticeable.
Yeah.
And
comment?
can I make a comment? Just as we were saying that the modernization projects capture a lot, and if you were to choose not to go with those modernizations, there's still an opportunity to catch maybe some other items by the other options available, although there's quite a few to choose from beyond these lists presented today. But same thing with the VAPA classrooms. As Kobe said, if we were to design a VAPA classroom, they would be larger than standard. They might have some soundproofing. They would have the internal storage. However, if the board were to decide, you know what, That's not going to happen, especially because of budgetary demands. Because if we're going to look at modernizations for 2 sites and, for example, a new performing arts center, then we wouldn't be able to do probably within Measure Z, the new classrooms throughout. But there could still be an opportunity to give maybe band storage or some sound minimizing to the classrooms that they're currently in, if that's not doable, and that's something that, you know, might still help the VAPA community without putting in those additional classrooms.
No, and it kind of also just echoing what Trustee Kirby-Gonzalez said, just would love to hear from our music educators about this as well, because again, in, you know, the 5 years that I was on the board, that music education and articulation of that, and kind of there was a desire going from elementary all the way up to kind of get some thoughts from teachers about that too. Not just focused on the high school, but just like the whole entire process.
And yeah, and that's something that we were excited whenever we were able to get that feedback during the input process. We were glad to hear. We had some of our teachers in the VAPA world that attended multiple meetings. So we were glad to have that. We tried to capture as many different stakeholders as possible in the subcommittee meeting, but we weren't able to get as many as we had hoped and reached out to. Not that I do have to admit, I didn't reach out to a music teacher specifically, but we were trying to get as many teacher representatives as possible that could diversify their input, not just one teacher. But we had a special needs. There's someone from, I can't remember. She's some sort of captain, and I apologize, but she was so wonderful
Holly's
to
an
have.
RSP. Yeah, no.
Yes.
I get it. Yes. So,
Right.
and Natalie's an Elkhorn parent and kinder teacher. So, but yeah, but that whole articulation of VAPA. Yeah. I mean, again, this is just a starting point to your point, that this is a conversation.
Yeah.
Person here, go ahead.
Again, Jackie, and I appreciate the questions, because I think the reason why there is no tally at all in VAPA, because VAPA, I remember it being it was a big emphasis in the conversation in both meetings. But I think we were under, at least from just looking at the tallies, everybody, I'm assuming, was under the impression that because they voted highly in that first part for the 2 sites and VAPA being across the district, it wasn't just a one campus. It was across, looking at the entire district, and supporting that. I think that then people moved away from it in the sense of, now we're looking at, as an example, on this sheet alone, if I'm looking at repair playground services versus band storage, I'm because I already checked off VAPA. I'm now looking at safety, and I'm now, my mind, I think that was like everybody started moving in that direction. Again, that may be not the case, but that's what I, based on that notebook, because VAPA was, I can tell you, it was up there. And it was, everybody was on the same page when it came to Alcorn, Westfield, and VAPA. There was really nothing else besides that. So because I didn't see anybody else, like I see now, nobody clicked on that, is because I think people then moved to the something like covered lunch areas versus sound minimizing classrooms, right? Like it was, then everybody started to move away from it, but VAPA was up there, right up there with everything else that we were looking to do in the big ticket section. And again, big ticket not meaning one center at River City, but more so looking at the VAPA program district wide. So how we can then, maybe it is a different chart, or maybe we are getting different options once we zone in on the fact that it was mainly, we understand Alcorn, we understand Westfield, and we understand the VAPA program. That seemed to be the 3 that everybody was looking at. And then once we were presented with this tally sheet, it was kind of then, again, once we saw this, it was this versus that, and you get 8 votes in a sense. And I think that's why people saw, again, a band storage versus cracked asphalt and removal of and replacement, right? It was kind of one of those things. And that's, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's what we all kind of understood, because it seems to be that everybody moved away from it. And on this, it would reflect that we weren't talking about VAPA, or that we weren't, that it wasn't even part of the conversation. But I can tell you, those were the three big areas we're looking at VAPA district-wide, not just as a center at River City, from what I remember.
Yeah. And I do recall there was a conversation that since River City brings in kids from all across the district, that there was that conversation held that, you know, this is an opportunity to have a performing arts center that, you know, many kids would be able to utilize from all over the district. And I think that's kind of what framed the conversation as we looked into other categories and the quick strike items as well. You know,
especially with limited funding dollars that
we're looking at.
And I think, and I think that maybe now that if we're all not in agreement necessarily, but if we're looking at Alcorn, Westfield, and the VAPA program, then we start to break that down into what exactly in the VAPA program, what would we be able to have dollars for, or what would the budget allow, and get more specific based on your guys' plans that you guys already had, as well as, and now that we know that those are the three, or we're all in agreement and in alignment, then breaking that down and having that be more of a tallied, if it is something that we move into, since this is across the board, this tally sheet is still looking at the entire, or at different areas in a sense, and it felt very this versus that. And again, if we're looking at now just placing these three big ticket items and breaking that down into smaller pieces, I think that's maybe the next step, or depending on what you guys are looking at.
Okay, President Pizzotti, go.
Yeah,
I'm trying
go
to be
ahead.
efficient with our time. Thinking of these pieces here, looking over the tech infrastructure, I think right away of, well, being at Westmore Oaks and hearing their alarms just going off randomly. But I'm so glad we now have the Fallbrook campus. So when I think of tech's infrastructure, you know, again, I think of that as being the most critical need across our schools. So at what school are they not able to access technology the way they need to? I wouldn't want to do that at every site if we have schools that are, of course, as we've talked about, are running well. But then that brings me to the question of, we know that there is a high cost associated with carrying a school that is potentially empty. And so did you have a conversation at all about how Westmore Oaks does fall into this, since we'll have students who are moving into Fallbrook, and how our spaces might be utilized? Did that come up at all? Because I'm thinking about our dollars, and that is an important conversation to have. And I'm wondering where that conversation fits into this.
Yeah, so there was a little bit of discussion held, but not much on, you know, Westmore Oaks. You're right. They have alarms going off. They have faulty telephone wires, and a lot of infrastructure technology issues. And that could potentially need to be used as a swing space if we choose to do Westfield and Elkhorn as the modernization projects, right? Because we can't have kids on campus while we're revitalizing those facilities. So we would have to be able to make sure that certain infrastructure be put in place, or at least fixed, while we are trying to do that. But it wasn't much of a discussion. It was just ever so brief. Do you have any more, Angie, on that?
Yeah, I was just going to add that that's definitely more of a board level decision as far as what we would be doing with those sites. And with those on the facilities master plan were called the underutilized sites. And so those were of less discussion because they really didn't fall into any of those categories, especially that was mentioned on in the ballot. However, if we were to use one as a swing space, one of our underutilized sites, then part of the implementation plan and the master program budget, it would include having to do some sort of modifications into or for those swing space sites, because we cannot have students come in and do any sort of improvements to maybe some of these underutilized sites that need extra capacity, whether it be additional portables or updating, or maybe it needs a new playground, without having DSA take a look at it. So that's one of the reasons why the implementation plan and the budget is important, because it forces the district to look at all avenues associated with possibly one project and how it might have a ripple effect.
Okay, so I think for me, that would be important information to have if we all have consensus, which it seems like we do, of Elkhorn and of Westfield being prioritized in terms of they desperately, we know, need upgrades, and what that timeline will look like in terms of, do we need to use an underutilized site, or is there a way to get that done through summer projects, through moving students, around, or what that might look like? I think that's an important piece to hear later, because there might be some costs associated with that we need to be aware of, I think, in terms of those spaces. And then the other piece, I did see covered lunch area that was consistent. And again, that goes with maybe the conversation that we have, that I know that with some of our COVID-19 dollars, we looked at outdoor benches and whatnot. And I'd like to just let us reframe, instead of thinking as a covered lunch area. It might be a covered lunch area during lunchtime, but it might be a classroom or a place to get buddy classes together during other times. So I think if we just rethink that frame of it's a covered lunch area, that it's a covered space that could be lunches and could be others, but maybe we can use some of our, that's a good place to maybe mirror some of the COVID dollars to get kids outside learning with a need that we already see that we need. And then another space that I saw was just to bring up in terms of APA that I want us to all be thinking about, that isn't necessarily full staff direction, but I did tour Natomas Charter Schools Performing Arts Center, which is a pretty incredible space. And that was done with a lot of private donors. But if we even think of, I know, Angie, it would be a lot of bricks to sell. But if we think about how we can utilize even having sponsors to, buy bricks and have plaques, or do a piece of that, I think that maybe we can, or maybe our facilities committee can think about how we can bring in some outside folks that might help with fundraising or might know those avenues, because there's a lot of opportunity there to help supplement some of these funds so that we can spread our dollars further. And then, okay, so that goes into infrastructure, those pieces. And then one that I was interested to see on here that I hadn't really thought about before, but I've been going around our sites regularly, and the paint that I saw many people check, which isn't normally something that would come to mind right away, but I do think that our schools are looking aged. Our school, the Fallbrook campus and Bright are two schools that look, real great from the outside. But I do think that that is an important thing to consider, and have me thinking a little bit differently in terms of being interested to know how much the cost is. Because I'm not sure if I feel more important about that than one other thing. It'll be important to see the cost breakdown of that. But I do know that we want our schools, when you drive up, to feel welcoming and well taken care of. And some of them, the paint is, they're just getting real old and they look a little tired. So I'd be interested in seeing that.
Yeah, and one thing that it was deferred maintenance, but it was certainly something that we all pretty much agreed on. And I think we could all agree that certainly raises the spirits of a student walking into the classroom as well, when they walk into a nice, fresh, clean looking campus, right? Which with a fresh coat of paint. There's definitely some campuses that I've seen that definitely they need sprucing up, just to look inviting and kind of build up the student's self-esteem about coming in and being happy to come to a campus that looks the part, looks professional, right? So yeah, there was definitely that portion that I think we were all pretty much unanimous about. We didn't have deep conversations about things that we were all pretty much in agreement on, but on the things that we had, smattering of disagreements, we asked why you would, why would you put this here? Why would you put that there over something else? Or, as there's really on this sheet, there's really only 2 items that had only one person that didn't agree with the rest of the committee. So, is there any other comments?
I have a question. I was curious about the card access throughout. I see Daniel's the only person who checked it off, but I was touring Riverbank, and they had that big outage. So have we considered the safety? Is that something that's in this project as well, or is that a different? Because I know that's going to be an expensive fix, but and it might not be able to happen across the board, but it definitely, I think it sounds like it needs to happen there. At Riverbank, they had an outage where the card keys don't work, so they have to use their manual keys, and it's pretty cumbersome. And actually, if you forget it or get locked out, or if there were a real emergency, I mean, it could be the same thing with the card key. You could easily forget that, but it was walking through the gates was surprisingly difficult to me, and I understood that it would be a really expensive fix. I'm not sure if it was a storm. We don't really have storms in California, but I'm not sure what was it, the wind storm? Something happened, I think, that was like nature. Yeah. And it
knocked out the power.
And it knocked down the whole system. So it doesn't work at Riverbank. And so it seems a safety issue to me.
It still doesn't work?
It did not as of probably 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
Okay.
So
I would go ahead, sir, Susan.
I can give you a status update, Trustee Barnes. It needed the main components of it replaced. It was killed in the storm, so to speak, and it has been replaced, and it's fully functioning again.
Great. Yeah, that was something that Daniel was actually pretty, he was pretty insistent about that. He really wanted to see, functioning gates and classrooms. He felt that the safety and security of students was paramount. So, I agree with him. Just because we didn't necessarily put that as a tally sheet, there's just so many different tally sheets for all of us to put something down. And Clerk Venegas and I both said we were kind of cognizant of how much the price tag was on some of the 3 items that we did all have kind of an agreement on, that we were kind of focusing on smaller ticket items, like things that wouldn't cost as much to potentially fix. But that was just the thought process. It's effectively the board's decision. So that's why the committee, they all had their interests and they all had their viewpoints, and they made it clear what they were on some of them. But on the ones that were fairly unanimous, we didn't go into or elaborate more. Okay. All right. Is there any other comments?
No, just generally just affirming the next time we see this, it'd be helpful to see price tags so that it's easier to prioritize within the budget. Right. So this is kind of more of an esoteric, like, hey, like without the actual dollars and cost, we might be able to do more things than just painting or whatever, but without understanding the cost, it's hard to say, well, this over this. Right.
In today's dollars. Right. All right. Can you stop sharing your screen? Thank you, Angie. All right, let me get back on the agenda here. Okay. So that was K3. We are moving on to okay. I just want to make sure you're there. Okay. Let's see. L1, finalized Measure Z bond issuance schedule. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services.
Yes, so on March 25th, we had our financial advisor give a comprehensive presentation, Blake Beam from KNN. He delivered a presentation, and we can absolutely post it again for this evening's benefit. But basically, the summary of the issuance schedule is that issuance A, Schedule A, would be around or approximately June 3rd is the date that's targeted for 60 million. And then 2 years after that, issue Series B, 50 million, and then issue Series C 2 years after that, which would be on June 3rd of 2025 of 40 million. So the schedule is attached to the March 25th board meeting agenda, and we can actually memorialize that as part of the minutes for this evening as well. But it was a comprehensive schedule, so the administration is requesting the board's approval of this schedule.
We have one public comment.
Yeah.
Yorgos, can you?
Yes, we have a request from, the name on the screen is Larry's Second Fire. Larry's Second Fire, your microphone is turned on and you may begin.
Hey, that's just my device. How are you guys tonight? I'm going to urge you guys not to go forward with this. There just seems to be so many questions from each of you that this is a conversation. There's questions about this. There's so many what ifs, maybes, might be's, could be's. This bill could pass. We could get money. No, sorry. We could get money from here. We don't even have a permanent CFO right now. And I appreciate the efforts of all of the staff. I've worked with them on a CBOC in the past. They work very hard, but without a permanent CFO, I think it's very difficult for you to figure out how you really should spend your money. I want to keep in mind also that with the passage of Measure Z, our community and our district is over $300 million in debt. And I think we need somebody permanent and on board full time as a CFO to help manage that money and those funds. I've listened to all of your priorities and everything else you guys all talk about. And I know there's a COP coming due soon. I didn't see anywhere in that priority list where that $15 million falls to help with that payment, for that balloon payment for that COP. I'd like to know when that payment is due and if that's going to be coming out of the top. I know it's recommended in the second phase, but if it's due sooner than that, are we going to take that 15 million? And how many small projects could be done with that $15 million? I heard the CPM gentleman talk about how the fees that we got for the facilities master plan were 2020 numbers, and that they need to reevaluate those. That was pre-COVID, reevaluate those to now numbers, 2022, 2021, and the future. I think we also need to look at our enrollment from 2020 pre-COVID versus what our enrollment is now and what we're anticipating it to be in the future, because that could have a very big bearing on where you spend the money and how you spend the money. I'm also curious, just on the side, I heard, Kobe, I heard you mention it a little bit, but when these schools undergo this mass reconstruction, what are we going to do with those students? I certainly hope we're not leaving them in that classroom. And I did hear reference to maybe moving them to another school. How are they going to get transported? Those are some really good questions, I think, that come out with it. Let me look at my notes real quick. I also found it very interesting that nobody voted up for the ADA resurfacing. Sure hope we don't get a lawsuit to upgrade things for ADA purposes. I don't know where that money would come from. So I just hope you guys take that all into consideration, not move forward with this until we get a CFO, somebody that's going to take the ball and run with it and crunch the numbers and come out with that accuracy on them. So good luck to you guys, and thank you very much.
All right, perfect timing. Okay. Is there any comments or discussions from the board? Okay, seeing and hearing none.
I do.
You. Sorry. Go ahead, Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Okay, thank you so much. Assistant or interim assistant superintendent Norma Gonzalez, can you help us a little bit to understand when this first issuance comes through, is that what is needed or will help to fund the gentleman helping us that we just talked about in terms of our implementation plan, Elkhorn and Westfield? Or are there any negative, maybe unintended consequences that we're not thinking of if we delayed to approve this? Can you just help us understand the timeline a little bit in terms of approving this to have this series issued now and what that would pay for in the immediate?
Yeah, that would encompass that cost because we could be able to utilize the first issuance for these purposes. I'm not sure if that's specific to your question or more is involved with that question, but yes, that this issuance would help with that process, with paying for that first vendor. I'm sorry. CPM. I was going to say another acronym. My apologies.
And then maybe this is for Angie as well, in terms of the timeline moving forward now in terms of the planning for, say, Elkhorn and Westfield, which we heard those two at least clearly. There's many other questions I think many of us are still looking at, but in terms of those sites, what would this timeline look like for that, or can we anticipate?
Well, I know Terry and I feel the same way about this. So Terry, I'm going to speak on your behalf here as well. We feel that the most successful, efficient, and the most bang for the buck projects we could get is when there's a lot of design development up front. And that's where all of that effort goes in, where we're talking with every single department head, teachers, site administrators. So that way it's not just the architect saying, okay, please do all of these things on the facilities master plan without understanding the nuances of experiencing the space. So the design development can take up to a year, even more. When we were working on Bright Phase 2 alone, we were in design development for almost 2 years. And then we were able to review as the architect was going along, sheet by sheet. And if we were looking at, say, an irrigation map, then we're able to call in our maintenance leads to take a look. Is this going to work? How do you feel about this spec? So it's actually a long process from when we start design to when we start construction. If we're putting in that effort at the beginning, which is typically what we would like to do. So it'll get going, it'll get moving, but then also even when we first get the first issuance of funds, we wouldn't contract right away with an architect either, because as many of you are aware, we have 6 architectural firms that were approved last year. I believe that there's 2 of which we've never worked with as a district. 2 we haven't done a construction project with in quite some time, and then 2 we've worked with more recently. So if we're talking these larger ticket items, in order to play fair, we would like to invite all 6 architects to present to us what they feel that the biggest benefits could be and what they could offer. And then we're not limited just to the 2-dimensional sheet in the facilities master plan. Now we're opening ourselves up to new ideas as to other efficient ways to do things or other layouts. Sorry, I don't know. I didn't know where I was going with that, but I feel like I said what I wanted to say.
Thank you. That's helpful. So in terms of the issuance and the work being done, is this similar then to past bonds of what we've done? Then it sounds like it is when it comes to, say, this Bright Cafe, which we're in right now in the series. So this is not out of line with what we've done before in terms of issuing the money as we work through the plans.
Oh, yeah. And if anything, I'm not sure if Kylie is here, but it could only work in our benefit because then we'll start gaining interest. So it's not that, so in this proposed plan with the first issuance of the $60 million, that $60 million is going to take us a very, very, very long time to spend because it's incremental with each consultant we have during the process.
President Pizzotti, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you again. I always look back to the plan, lots of work done into it. And my question is that between just prioritizing our big ticket items like Westfield and Elkhorn outright on the equity stuff, that's $69 million. That's why and that's 2022 projection, not the 2020 projection. So let me just say that you did a good job in projecting the cost as we delay projects. So again, public document, anybody can look at it. And so I think given that those are 22 projection and for me, I feel like there's consensus with the board to move with equity projects on those two campuses, that I am comfortable issuing the series because my calculation is that $652,082, and we're only issuing $60,000. So we'll probably have to get some more money as the project unfolds. So just want to be transparent. We are a board that's transparent and consistent with what we put out there. And and that's if we break ground in 2022. So I would hate to delay it. And I think there's a very clear direction from the board to actually focus, especially on equity on those two campuses. So am I correct in reading the document again correctly? Angie?
Yes, but part of that with the implementation plan is which site of those would we like to do first? Because as we mentioned, there might be some use of swing space, or if the board would prefer to do half the site at one time and half the site could be dispersed elsewhere. There's a lot of different nuances with each of those decisions. Yeah. And also with that 69 million for campus equity, that doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't include the swing space that we would need to house those other students. So even though that first issuance of 60 million, yeah, we wouldn't be able to get all that equity in there, but it would be a start. And then in 2 years, we would be able to build upon that and budget the entire 150 million.
Yeah, just validating that we had more conversation about the quick list, but this is prioritizing the big two buckets is a pretty big ticket item already for that first 60 million. So thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Wong. Is there any other questions, comments from the board? No, seeing and hearing none. All right, do we have a motion on this item since this is an action item?
I move.
Moved by Clerk Venegas. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Vice President Wong. Vice President Wong.
Aye.
Venegas.
Aye.
Aye.
Trustee Kerrigan.
Aye.
And I too vote aye. All right, thank you. All right, L2, create priority project and quick strike project list of projects in order of priority to be funded by Measure Z. That's a tongue twister. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Assistant Superintendent of Administrative Services.
Yeah, thank you. And this is the actual item that I know that there's been a lot of discussion around, but this is where we would, the administration would seek your guidance, as Angie has also been speaking, and your conversations as well. So not sure if there's any more information with regard to this, being that this is now an action item. Do you have any questions or any other comments regarding this topic?
I could elaborate on that as well, if that's okay, Norma.
Of course, thank you.
So what the information that we received today, please don't feel that the responsibility to budget the $150 million needs to be worked out today. That's something that we would put into place in the implementation plan and in the budget development. What we would like to hear, what are your biggest priorities? What are the must-haves? And we're going to do our darndest to fit in as much as we can, both in the quick strike and in the project priority list. So if we're hearing from the board that, you know, such and such in the quick strike list is an absolute must, and then let's say for some reason these major ticket items, they aren't so important to us, these quick strike items are here, then we'll know to prioritize that in the planning, and then we might take into account those larger projects. But obviously that's an extreme example because that wouldn't happen today. So we are just really looking to hear your ideas, what the priorities are, and then we're going to put the budgeting and the timing and the escalation up to the professionals. So if this were to work out, if it were to be in priority order, that would make it really clear for us as a district to see how we can fit it in. And even if, let's say, number one on the quick strike list is something that through the cost evaluation, through the estimation, we're able to see that that number one priority list is on the quick strike is actually super duper expensive, and we can't fit it with these other project priorities, then we might have to go to number two on the quick strike list, whatever that may be. And then we're able to bring that back to the board. How does this look, board? Does this seem like it would work for you? And we would like to get as much information without a lot of wiggle, without just if we have that list, we're able to hear all of the directions correctly, then that means that CPM will be able to put together more elaborate and direct budgets, and also the project timeline, so that way we could see it a little bit better. If it's, well, we like all of these and we like all of these, then that doesn't help us break it down into the nitty gritty to see what we can afford and possibly what could break off and we could afford in a smaller or later, or if there's something left over at the very end. We're interested in hearing all of that information.
Thank you, Angie. And I think it's pretty clear from the board's conversations that number one and two are the modernizations. At least that's what I personally can say from my perspective, the Westfield and Elkhorn modernizations. You know, and then in my opinion, you know, quickly behind it is the Performing Arts Center. But you know, not everybody may feel that same way. So, you know, if everybody has something that they'd like to add to the conversation, it's open. Vice President Wong.
Sorry, you hear a little voice.
Sorry.
Yes, I'll talk to you about it in a second. We're almost done. I promise. I promise we're almost done.
It's not been 4 hours already.
You're on mute, Jackie.
It's okay.
There you go.
So yes, I concur. And as I said, the quick strike list is a little bit more complicated because as I said, I just need to know how much each piece costs, right? Like it's hard to actually, so I'm not comfortable doing a quick, you know, a quick strike list because it depends, right? The big ticket items are more clear for me, like to your point. I'm going to use just the equity investments in Elkhorn and Westworld clear to me. And behind that, definitely the Performing Arts Center, right? I concur with that. And those three alone are pretty big ticket items. I'm trying to figure out how much wiggle room after those big three, if any, there is a, you know, again, not knowing how much each quick, you know, what do we call it? Those short list costs, at this point, I can't provide any direction.
Especially, and I agree with you, you know, and especially when we could be looking at tomorrow's dollar, which may be, you know, exponentially more. So, yeah, that it's hard for us to really wrap our heads around when we're looking at, you know, three items that are upwards of 120 in today's dollars, right? That makes it really hard to really concentrate on what could potentially be a quick strike item when we have to set aside, at least that amount and what could that amount could grow, right? As we have, project costs that are done at a later date, and those project costs kind of grow as time goes on through inflation. So yeah, I concur. There are other comments?
And
Yeah, I would go just echo the same thing, and I think it's cost, but it's also what's already included in the big ticket, so that way we're not going over it and over it and over it, right? It's some of these quick strikes, again, it sounded like they were part of the big ticket as well. So I think again, we got 1, 2, and 3 from my end as well. Seems like those are a priority, and then we can move on to everything else.
Any other? Did you want to think quickly?
yeah, the identifying any quick strike projects, it's totally optional. It's kind of commonplace, because if we would like to do something right out of the gate that doesn't require a year or 2 of planning, and we would like to show the community something district-wide that has an immediate impact in some way, that could be accomplished through a quick strike project while the larger projects are still in design development. It's optional. It really serves a purpose, that if there is extra money, what we should direct that to on a larger platform or a more quick platform.
Okay, Trustee Kirby-Gonzalez.
Sure, I think yes, we're all in agreement on our the 3 large. In terms of, it sounded like you were asking as well as between, say, Elkhorn and Westfield, what would our priority be? And I think for me, it would really be staff direction in terms of what you all see, because I know there might be a site, for example, where we know Elkhorn's front lobby, I guess that's what we could call it, is leaves a lot to be desired. And for example, maybe staff would decide, hey, that we could keep all our kids on campus and relocate an office and have a different entrance. So I just defer that. For me, I defer that to you all in terms of what you see as the right fit and which one is the best one mostly for our students in terms of the least impact and what makes the most sense. And also which one is the most critical to fix soon for our kids. Do you have something to say too? Terry, does that sound okay?
No, that sounds good. I kind of spoke with Assistant Superintendent Moisich on this topic, which one would go first, and we jointly concluded because it has a bigger equity gap. Westfield's missing some of those key components that happened during the K-8 process with the rest of the district, and it is those extra rooms, those science spaces. They don't have any purpose-built science rooms, and again the exercise area and some other things in addition to their playground, particularly in the kinder room, needs probably more attention than any other playground in the district. And their kinder rooms also don't have internal restrooms. So there's a lot of needs there that more so than even other sites, more so than even Elkhorn, who also has a lot of needs and needs a lot of attention.
I love that. I mean, I think that probably I can imagine the staff cheering right now. I can hear them in the background at Westfield. So I fully support, and I think that's fabulous. And then the only other piece I'll say, because you asked about quick strikes, and I hear our 3 big items, but I would like to also hear for an immediate, just kind of an idea of cost for the outdoor space, which we could call lunch/learning, maybe, because that might tie into with some of our COVID needs. So I'm thinking that would be a good one to look at and consider costs. The paint would be a good one to see in terms of the cost of our schools. And then maybe some water bottle stations at some, what would that cost be? And that also to me goes somewhat with COVID as we think about this, you know, filling up our, we've all seen kids using the little water fountains, which have had to be closed, right? We've even caution taped them off in some places. So that might be another one that is really important as we start our year, if that could have a quick turnaround and to at least know the cost of it.
So are you saying that the covered lunch
areas could potentially plan COVID dollars, therefore
and something we might be able to do?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And so I'm not telling us to all give direction as a board, but I'm saying that those are, if we're looking at the possibility of quick strike, I think that those would be ones I'm interested to know the cost on. And if they overlap with COVID dollars, which we're going to need to be spending, we've already talked about the tables. So maybe those overlap really well and will minimize the cost of the bond, but also meet the needs of what we see people are interested in.
Trustee Barnes?
I just was thinking about the, going back to the VAPA conversation. I actually wrote the same thing down as Vice President Wong, why was VAPA sort of overlooked? So I appreciate both of your perspectives on that. My concern as a former, as a musician, I guess, is that growing up often I feel music was overlooked. Of course, I'm from Texas, so sports were heavy, but I just want to be sure that we do incorporate the music teachers before moving forward necessarily with the quick strike list, and then also looking at what it would cost to have things such as, when I was in one city, we had choir with a stage and a soundproofed room, and it was beautiful and students did really well. And then in another city, there wasn't a choir room, which was hard for me. So, I want to be sure that we really incorporate that. And as we look at different ways of learning and, or even, just how we adapt with COVID, we incorporate not just our old ways of, sports heavy or academic heavy even, but we also recognize that you learn through experiences with music, and that also creates a unified spirit. So I just want to be sure that we also consider the performance music piece of all of this as well, and would also, as Vice President Wong said, like to see the cost breakdown. I would, especially as a new board member, I'm a little bit lost on a lot of the cost breakdown because the document is so big. And while I have looked through it, it's still very overwhelming. So it would be helpful for me to have some of that before moving forward with the,
Okay, is there any other comments, questions? Okay. Do we need a vote on this, or is it just direction? It's an action item, okay. So we have, let's see, created a project priority list. And I believe it was the three major ones of Westfield, Elkhorn, and the Performing Arts Center. And then the quick strike of.
Can I clarify to bring back,
please.
if we could give direction or action to bring back the information about the quick strike?
Okay.
So the direction, the action to move forward with three projects. Bring
the three projects, okay. Okay, we can do that. All right, so the three, oh wait, Angie, you're.
Yeah, can I ask a question to that, Sarah? So if we want to get super fine tuning with the various items here, would the board be in support of maybe getting a cost estimator to get super accurate? Because the facilities master plan, for example, the painting exteriors, that's something that's included in kind of multiple things. So if we're looking to get that, okay, great. That I feel better about that because I'm like, I could kind of pull different things, but I don't know how accurate that would be. Wonderful.
No, and I think that would be incredibly helpful, Angie, once we get to see what we're talking about in terms of dollars. I mean, we're all looking at big picture and big project items that are really hard to see past. And so it's hard to identify what those smaller project items are going to cost. So, all right, well, with that, we have the 3 items of Westfield, Elkhorn, and the Performing Arts Center as the priority projects that we're giving direction to. So can I get a motion on that?
I move.
Moved by Vice President Wong.
I second.
Second by Clerk Venegas.
Trustee Gonzalez?
Aye.
I too vote aye. Clerk Venegas?
Aye.
Trustee Barnes?
Aye.
And Vice President Wong.
Aye.
All righty. We have our project. All right. L3. Yay, right? Yay.
I'm so
Thank you.
excited.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yay, we can get to work. I feel like this is such a big accomplishment. I'm so proud of everyone in this chat. This has been a long time coming, and I'm so glad that we finally get to deliver it. So thank you so much. Yay.
Thank you too, Angie.
Thank you so much. And I just got to say, we got to give a big shout out to Angie and Terry and Norma for this. So really, thank you so much for all the hard work and really help facilitating the subcommittee and getting everybody together on the subcommittee and answering all these questions. I can't thank you enough for all the hard work that you guys have done, and I really do appreciate it. And thank you, Dr. Hildreth, as well, for attending these committee meetings and really kind of putting your value add into it. So thank you so much.
And Chris Mounts Medeiros, who's probably watching right now, and Superintendent Luna. Let's just be clear, but there are lots of people who aren't here anymore who are still watching, literally waiting, waiting for this.
And former Superintendent Luna is probably going.
Yeah.
All right. So let's move on to L3,
Sunshine of the West Sacramento Teachers Association bargaining proposal to the Washington Unified School District for successor contract negotiations for the 2021-24 school year. Norma Gonzalez, Interim Associate Superintendent of Administrative Services.
Perfect, thank you. So as a follow-up from the public hearing that we had earlier this evening, the actual action item coming forth this evening is that WSTA has submitted their Sunshine proposal for successor negotiations. The current contract that we're currently working with does officially sunset on June 30th. We have agreed to engage in full contract negotiations next year, but because we are already in negotiations, typically we would start to begin that process this year. So with your approval, WSTA has tendered or submitted their Sunshine proposal to negotiate Article 17 compensation as well as unit member benefits, and seeking your approval.
Great, thank you. Is there questions, comments from the board? No? All right. Do we have a motion?
I'll move.
Moved by Trustee Barnes.
I'll second.
Second by Trustee Kirby Gonzalez. Vice President Wong.
Aye.
Clerk Venegas.
Aye.
Trustee Barnes.
Aye.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Aye.
And I too vote aye. All right. Moving to L4, Sunshine of the Washington Unified School District's bargaining proposal to the West Sacramento Teachers Association for successor contract negotiations for the 2021 through 24 school year. Norma Gonzalez.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. My apologies.
That's okay.
So yes, in like manner and also in good faith, it's like good faith in that we're also, the administration, WSD is also submitting the two, actually, I beg your pardon, 3 articles to Sunshine for this coming session of negotiations, which would be the article number 1 agreement, which would basically spell out the term of the 3 years of that multi-year collective bargaining agreement, and those 2 same articles, Article 17 as well as Article 18. And the administration seeks your approval.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Do we have any discussion from the board? No? Okay, is there a motion?
I'll move.
Moved by Trustee Barnes. Second by Clerk Venegas. We'll start with roll call. Clerk Venegas.
Aye.
Trustee Barnes.
Aye.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Aye.
Vice President Wong.
Aye.
And I too vote aye.
Thank you.
Okay. And with that, the meeting has adjourned, and apparently we've learned that we do not need to take a motion to adjourn because we've concluded all the business on the on the agenda. So with that, everyone,